The sun streamed through the tall windows of the governor's office, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Colonel Andrew Thompson sat in a comfortable leather chair, his hands folded neatly in his lap as he tried to process what he'd just been told. The governor's words still rang in his ears. "Congratulations, Colonel Thompson. You are now the new state police chief." Andrew nodded politely, maintaining his professional composure despite the emotions swirling inside him. 25 years of hard work had led to this moment. 25 years of early mornings, late nights, missed family dinners, and countless sacrifices. As a black man in law enforcement, every step up the ladder had been twice as difficult, requiring twice the effort to gain half the recognition. "Thank you, Governor," Andrew finally said, his deep voice steady. "I'm honored by your trust in me." The governor, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled as he walked around his massive desk. "The honor is mine, Colonel. Your record speaks for itself. Your work as deputy commissioner in the neighboring state caught my attention, especially your community policing initiatives. That's exactly what we need here." Andrew thought about his journey. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, he'd seen firsthand how the relationship between police and the community could go wrong. He'd become an officer with dreams of changing things from the inside. Now, after all these years, he finally had the chance to make those changes on a large scale. "When will the announcement be made public?" Andrew asked, thinking about the wave of reactions that would follow. "Next Monday at the press conference," the governor replied. "You'll be officially introduced to the department and the public then." The governor paused, then added what they both knew. "You'll be only the second black state police chief in our state's history." Andrew nodded again. He understood the weight of that fact, the expectations and scrutiny that would come with it. Some would see his appointment as inspiring progress. Others would call it tokenism or worse. The thought reminded him of his father's words, "You can't control what people think of you, only what you do." After leaving the governor's office, Andrew walked slowly through the Capitol building. Staff members hurried past, none recognizing him yet. That would change soon enough. For now, he enjoyed the anonymity, the chance to observe without being observed. Outside, the early autumn air felt crisp against his face. Andrew loosened his tie slightly and decided to take the long way to his car. He needed time to think. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his wife, Tanya. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and concern. "It's official," Andrew said simply. Tanya's squeal of delight made him smile. "I knew it. I'm so proud of you, baby. Wait till I tell the kids." Their two children were both in college now, his son studying criminal justice, inspired by his father's career. His daughter pursuing computer science, determined to chart her own path. Both would be thrilled by the news. "The announcement isn't until Monday," Andrew reminded her. "Let's keep it quiet until then." After hanging up, Andrew continued his walk. He thought about the challenges ahead. The state police department had its issues, complaints about racial profiling, excessive force, and community distrust. That's why they'd brought him in. His reputation for fair leadership and innovative reforms had preceded him. Andrew had a vision for what the department could become. Better training, more accountability, stronger ties with the communities they served. But he knew change wouldn't come easily. There would be resistance from officers set in their ways, from unions protective of their members, from politicians with their own agendas. As he reached his car, Andrew felt a mix of pride and determination settling over him. This position wasn't just a career achievement, it was a chance to make real difference, to show that law enforcement could protect and serve everyone equally, regardless of race or background. He had 1 week before officially stepping into his new role, 1 week to prepare for the storm that would follow. Andrew decided to use that time wisely. He would drive through the counties under his new jurisdiction, see the communities with his own eyes, get a feel for the place away from official visits and formal introductions. Little did he know, that decision would lead to an encounter that would test his resolve right from the start. 2 days before his big introduction as the new state police chief, Andrew decided he needed to see the state for himself. Not through official visits or fancy motorcades, but the way regular folks saw it. He wanted to feel the roads, see the small towns, and understand the places he'd soon be responsible for protecting. "You sure about this?" Tanya asked as she watched him pack a small overnight bag. The press conference is just around the corner. Andrew smiled at his wife's concern. That's exactly why I need to do this now. Once I'm officially introduced, I won't be able to just drive around without everyone knowing who I am. He chose to wear casual clothes, a simple blue button-up shirt and khaki pants. No uniform, no badge, nothing that would give away his position. For these 2 days, he'd just be another traveler passing through. Call me when you stop for the night, Tanya said, giving him a quick kiss. And Andra? Be careful out there. He nodded, understanding the layers in her warning. 25 years in law enforcement hadn't erased the reality of being a black man driving alone on rural roads. Andra took his personal car, a 10-year-old navy blue sedan. It was clean and well-maintained, but nothing flashy. As he pulled out of the driveway, he felt a sense of freedom. For years, his movements had been scheduled, organized, and public. This small road trip felt like a breath of fresh air before diving into the deep responsibilities waiting for him. The morning drive was peaceful. Andrew crossed through the eastern counties, stopping at a small diner for lunch where he chatted with the waitress about local landmarks. He visited a county courthouse, walking through as an ordinary citizen, observing how people were treated. He drove past state police substations, noting their conditions and locations. By late afternoon, he was heading through Pine County, one of the more rural areas of the state. Rolling hills covered with thick forests stretched out on both sides of the 2-lane highway. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Andrew turned down the radio, enjoying the quietness of the moment. In his rearview mirror, blue lights suddenly flashed to life. Andrew checked his speedometer. He was going exactly at the speed limit. Maybe it was just a patrol car rushing to an emergency. But no, the cruiser stayed right behind him, lights flashing. Andrew felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he carefully signaled and pulled over to the shoulder. The police cruiser stopped behind him, its headlights bright in his mirrors. Force of habit made him reach for his badge before remembering he'd left it at home on purpose. He took a deep breath and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. 25 years as a police officer had taught him the procedures, but right now he wasn't Colonel Andrew Thompson, the incoming state police chief. He was just another black man being pulled over on a lonely stretch of road. Through his side mirror, Andrew watched 2 officers step out of their vehicle. Both were young, probably in their late 20s, and both looked tense. One approached the driver's side while the other hung back slightly, hand resting near his holster. "Evening, sir," the first officer said, shining a flashlight into Andrew's car. "License and registration." "Good evening, officer," Andrew replied calmly. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The officer's face hardened. "License and registration first, then we'll get to that." Andrew nodded slowly. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my back pocket and then for my registration in the glove compartment." He moved deliberately, retrieving his license and registration. As he handed them over, he noticed the officer's name tag, Officer Riley. The second officer had moved closer now, watching intently. Officer Riley looked at the license and back at Andrew. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Thompson." "Just taking a drive through the state," Andrew explained, "getting to know the area better." "Aha," Riley said, clearly skeptical. "Any reason you were swerving back there?" Andrew was surprised. "I wasn't swerving, officer. I've been driving carefully all day." The second officer spoke up. "We saw your vehicle cross the center line twice in the last mile." Andrew knew he had done no such thing, but he kept his voice level. "I respect that you're doing your job, officers, but I'm certain I maintained my lane." Riley's expression darkened. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "May I ask why that's necessary?" Andrew asked. "Step out of the vehicle now, sir," Riley repeated, his hand moving to rest on his belt. Andrew recognized the escalation and carefully opened his door. As he stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, the setting sun cast long shadows across the road. In the distance, a truck rumbled by, its driver glancing curiously at the scene before continuing on. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Riley instructed. Andrew complied, feeling a surge of complicated emotions. As someone who had worn the uniform for decades, he understood police procedures. but as a black man being ordered to assume this position on the side of a rural road with no clear cause, he felt the indignity acutely. "Are you going to tell me what this is about?" he asked, maintaining his composure even as Riley began to pat him down. "We have reason to believe you might be transporting something illegal," the second officer stated. "Based on what evidence?" Andrew asked. Neither officer answered as Riley continued his search more thoroughly than standard procedure would require. The second officer circled Andrew's car, peering through the windows. "What brings you through Pine County anyway?" Riley asked, his tone suspicious. "Not many folks from the city come out this way unless they're up to something." As the officers continued their unwarranted search, Andrew stood quietly, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the hills. In less than 48 hours, he would be in charge of every state trooper in the jurisdiction, including these two men. But right now, on this lonely stretch of road, that future seemed very far away. The evening air grew colder as Andrew stood with his hands on his car, watching Officer Riley flip through his wallet. Every card, every receipt was pulled out and examined. The second officer, whose name tag read Officer Wilson, was now shining his flashlight into Andrew's back seat. "Mind if we search your vehicle?" Wilson asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. Andrew knew his rights. "Actually, I do mind. Unless you have probable cause or a warrant, I don't consent to a search." Riley stepped closer, invading Andrew's personal space. "Listen, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Folks who have nothing to hide generally don't have a problem with us taking a quick look." "I'm not hiding anything," Andrew replied calmly. "But I believe in proper procedure. What was your reason for pulling me over again?" Riley's jaw tightened. "I told you you were swerving. And now you're being uncooperative, which makes me think you might be impaired." "I haven't had anything to drink," Andrew stated, "and I wasn't swerving." Wilson joined his partner. "How about you take a sobriety test for us, just to be sure?" Andrew took a deep breath. He could feel his heart pounding, but kept his voice steady. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but this stop is beginning to feel like harassment." "Harassment?" Riley scoffed. "Sir, step away from the vehicle and walk in a straight line for me." Though Andrew knew this was unnecessary, he complied. He walked the line perfectly, turned, and walked back, satisfied. Instead of answering, Riley turned to Wilson. "Keep an eye on him." Then he walked back to their patrol car, Andrew's license and registration in hand. Wilson positioned himself between Andrew and his car. "Where are you headed tonight anyway?" "I was planning to stay in Rivertown," Andrew answered. "Rivertown? What business you got there?" "Just passing through, seeing the state." Wilson smacked. "You picked some strange places to sightsee. Not much to look at around here unless you're looking for trouble." A pickup truck slowed as it passed them, the driver craning his neck to watch. Andrew felt exposed, standing on the roadside like a criminal. He'd conducted hundreds of traffic stops in his career, but he'd always treated people with respect. This felt different, targeted, demeaning. "How long have you been with the state police?" Andrew asked, trying to establish some connection. Wilson looked surprised by the question. 3 years. Why?" "Just curious about the department." Riley returned before Wilson could respond. He handed back Andrew's license and registration, but kept a suspicious expression. "Your record's clean, but something still doesn't add up. What brings a city guy like you out to these parts?" Andrew hadn't mentioned he was from the city. The assumption bothered him, but he kept his voice neutral. "I'm getting familiar with different parts of the state. Is that unusual?" "Around here?" "Yeah, it is," Riley said. "Pop your trunk for me." "Do you have probable cause to search my trunk, Officer Riley?" Andrew asked. "Listen, you're really starting to get on my nerves with this attitude," Riley said, stepping closer. "Most people around here respect the badge." "I have tremendous respect for the badge," Andrew replied. "I also have respect for the law and proper police procedure." Wilson chuckled. "We got ourselves a lawyer here, Pete." Riley crossed his arms. "No, I think we got ourselves someone who's watched too many videos about knowing your rights. Look, buddy, out here we do things differently. We keep our communities safe by being thorough." Andrew remained silent for a moment, weighing his options. As the future head of the state police, he could identify himself right now. That would end this immediately. But then he'd never know how these officers truly behaved when they thought no one was watching. "I'm going to reach into my pocket for my phone," Andrew said carefully. "I'd like to record this interaction." Riley's face hardened. "Put your hands back on the car." "I'm not resisting," Andrew clarified, slowly putting his hands back as instructed. "But I would like to know why this stop is continuing when I've broken no laws." "Because something isn't right here," Riley insisted. "And until I figure out what, you're staying put." A car drove by, slowing down to rubberneck at the scene. Andrew felt a mixture of frustration and sadness. This was exactly the kind of policing he wanted to change. The kind that made citizens feel threatened rather than protected. "Officer Riley," Andrew said quietly, "I understand you're concerned. But I'm just a man taking a drive through the state. Nothing more, nothing less." "A man with a pretty nice watch and fancy shoes driving through counties where we've had drug trafficking problems," Riley countered. "Forgive me if I'm a bit suspicious." Andrew looked down at his watch. A gift from Tanya for their 20th anniversary, and his shoes, which were comfortable but hardly fancy. The implication was clear, and it stung. Wilson's radio suddenly crackled to life. Both officers looked over as a dispatcher's voice came through. "Unit 17, what's your 20? Over." Wilson walked a few steps away to respond. "Highway 16, mile marker 42. Conducting a traffic stop. Over." "Copy that. Can you confirm the name on that license? Over." Wilson looked back at Riley, who pulled out Andrew's license again. "Thompson, under JDOB 5 to 1273. Over." There was a long pause. Then the radio crackled again. "Unit 17, verify that name again. Is that Andrew James Thompson? Over." Riley and Wilson exchanged a puzzled look. "That's affirmative, dispatch. Why? Is there a problem? Over." The next response from dispatch made both officers stiffen. "Unit 17, be advised that's Colonel Thompson, the incoming state police chief, effective Monday. Captain Rodriguez is requesting immediate contact. Over." The color drained from Riley's face as he slowly turned to look at Andrew. Wilson's mouth literally fell open. For a moment, no one spoke. The night seemed to freeze around them. Andrew simply stood there, hands still resting on his car, face calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. This moment of revelation had finally arrived, and now everything would change. The silence that followed the radio message seemed to stretch for an eternity. Officer Riley's hand, still holding Andrew's license, trembled slightly. Officer Wilson stood frozen, his mouth working but no words coming out. The night air felt suddenly thick with tension. Andrew straightened up slowly, no longer keeping his hands on the car. He didn't speak, didn't gloat, didn't rage. He simply watched as the realization washed over the two officers' faces. "Sir, I..." Riley finally stammered, suddenly switching to a respectful tone that had been entirely absent moments before. "Colonel Thompson, I had no idea." "Clearly," Andrew said quietly. Wilson stepped forward, nearly tripping over his words. "Sir, we were just following protocol for suspicious vehicles in the area. There's been some drug trafficking and..." Andrew raised his hand, and Wilson fell silent immediately. The power dynamic had shifted completely in the span of a few seconds. Now, both officers stood rigid, almost at attention. "Your badge number is 1742, correct, Officer Riley?" Andrew asked, his voice calm but firm. "And yours is 1896, Officer Wilson." "Yes, sir," they answered in unison, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The radio crackled again. "Unit 17, Captain Rodriguez requests your immediate return to the station. Colonel Thompson is to be escorted if he wishes, or left to continue his travel unimpeded. Over." Riley fumbled with the radio. "Copy that. Dispatch. Over." Andrew took his license and registration back from Riley's still outstretched hand. "I think I'll continue on my own, thank you." "Sir," Riley began, his voice now almost pleading, "I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. If we had known who you were..." "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Andrew interrupted. "My treatment shouldn't depend on my rank or position." Both officers fell silent, unable to meet his gaze. In the distance, another car approached, its headlights briefly illuminating their faces. Andrew could see the fear there, fear for their jobs, their futures. "Colonel Thompson," Wilson tried again. Please understand, this area has had problems with. I'm well aware of the issues in this county, Andrew cut in. What I witnessed here tonight, however, had nothing to do with legitimate police work. Andrew turned and walked slowly around his car, examining where Wilson's flashlight had left smudges on the windows. He ran his finger over a scratch on the trunk where Riley had rested his equipment. Do you know what I saw tonight, officers? He asked, his voice steady. I saw 2 state police officers pull over a citizen without cause. I saw them escalate a routine traffic stop into an intimidation tactic. I saw assumptions made based on appearance rather than evidence. The officers stood silent, taking the rebuke. Is this how you conduct all your traffic stops? Andrew asked. Neither officer answered immediately. Finally, Riley spoke up. No, sir, not all of them. Just the ones with black drivers passing through. Andrew asked pointedly. The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. Andrew leaned against his car and looked up at the night sky. Stars were beginning to appear overhead, far from city lights. He'd spent his entire career working toward moments like this, moments where he could actually change things from the inside. I'll be at headquarters on Monday morning, he said finally. Both of you will report to my office at 9 a.m. sharp. Yes, sir, they responded in unison, looking like schoolboys called to the principal's office. You're dismissed, Andrew said quietly. The officers hesitated, clearly unsure if they should say more. Then Riley nodded stiffly, and both returned to their patrol car. Andrew watched as they pulled away, their taillights disappearing around a bend in the road. He stood there for a moment, alone on the empty highway. The encounter had confirmed what he'd suspected. The problems in the department ran deep. Old habits, biases, and toxic cultures didn't disappear with new leadership. They had to be addressed directly. Andrew got back into his car, but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and saw 3 missed calls from Tanya. He dialed her number. Andrew? She answered on the first ring. What happened? Captain Rodriguez called here looking for you. He sounded worried. I'm fine, Andrew assured her. Just had an educational experience with some of our state troopers. What did they do? Her voice was sharp with concern. Andrew sighed. Nothing I haven't seen before. Nothing that doesn't happen to people who look like me every day. But you're their boss now, Tanya said. That changes things, right? It should, Andrew agreed. But change doesn't happen automatically. Those officers didn't see their future boss tonight. They just saw a black man driving alone on a country road. As he started his car, Andrew could hear the worry in Tanya's voice turn to anger on his behalf. He listened as she expressed her outrage, smiling slightly at her fierce protectiveness. It's actually good this happened, he said when she paused for breath. Good? How on earth is this good? Because now I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Andrew explained. I've seen it firsthand, not filtered through reports or statistics. After promising to call when he reached his hotel, Andrew hung up and pulled back onto the highway. The stars were fully visible now, countless pinpoints of light against the darkness. His encounter with officers Riley and Wilson had been unpleasant, even humiliating, but it had hardened his resolve. Monday wouldn't just be his first day as state police chief. It would be the first day of real change in the department. And those 2 officers had unknowingly given him exactly what he needed, a place to start. Andrew finally arrived at his hotel in Rivertown just after 10 o'clock. The small lobby was quiet except for the night clerk, who barely looked up from her magazine as he checked in. His room was simple but clean, a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the town's main street. After a quick shower, Andrew sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the evening replaying in his mind. His phone buzzed with a text from Captain Rodriguez. Sir, please accept my deepest apologies for tonight's incident. I've spoken with both officers. They'll face disciplinary action immediately. Andrew typed back, no disciplinary action yet. I want to handle this personally on Monday. He set his phone down and walked to the window. Rivertown was mostly dark now, just a few streetlights and the neon sign of a diner still glowing. Tomorrow, he'd continue his drive through the western counties, then head home to prepare for Monday's official introduction. But tonight's encounter had changed things. Andrew had always known that becoming the state's second black police chief would come with challenges. He'd faced skepticism and prejudice throughout his career, but experiencing it from his own officers just days before taking command made everything more real. His phone rang. Tanya again. "How are you really doing?" she asked, knowing him well enough to hear beyond his earlier reassurances. Andrew sighed. "Honestly, I'm angry. But I'm also grateful in a strange way. Grateful for being harassed. For seeing the truth," he explained. "Those officers showed me exactly what needs to change. No sugarcoating, no pretending things are better than they are." "And you still plan to meet with them Monday?" "First thing," Andrew confirmed. "But not to fire them." Tanya was silent for a moment. "You're a better person than I am." "I'd want them gone." Andrew smiled slightly. "That would be the easy solution. Fire them, make an example, show everyone I won't tolerate that behavior." He paused. "But then what?" "2 officers get replaced, and the system stays the same." After saying goodnight to Tanya, Andrew couldn't sleep. He opened his laptop and pulled up the personnel files he'd been studying. Officer Peter Riley, 27 years old, 3 years on the force. Officer David Wilson, 29, transferred from a county sheriff's department 2 years ago. Both had decent records, a few civilian complaints but nothing major. Both products of their training and culture. Around midnight, Andrew's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Colonel Thompson, this is Officer Riley. I got your number from Captain Rodriguez. I know it's late, but I needed to apologize personally. What happened tonight was inexcusable. I understand if you want my badge." Andrew stared at the message for a long time. The easy response would be to tell Riley to save it for Monday or to ignore him entirely. Instead, he typed, "Officer Riley, I appreciate your message. Monday morning, 9 a.m., my office. We'll discuss it then." Another text came through almost immediately. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." Andrew set his phone down and finally felt tired enough to sleep. As he drifted off, he thought about what he would say to Riley and Wilson on Monday. Not just words of discipline, but a conversation that might actually change how they policed. Morning came with bright sunlight streaming through the thin hotel curtains. Andrew packed quickly and checked out, nodding to a new clerk who seemed equally uninterested in his presence. He grabbed coffee and breakfast at the local diner, sitting quietly at the counter and listening to the conversations around him, regular people talking about their lives, their town, their concerns. An older man in a worn baseball cap took the stool next to Andrew. "You passing through?" he asked, friendly but curious about the stranger. "Just getting to know the area," Andrew replied with a smile. "Well, it's a good place," the man said, "but watch yourself on those country roads. Our state troopers can be a bit eager, if you know what I mean." Andrew nodded. "I'd actually had an interesting experience with them last night." "Let me guess," the man said, lowering his voice. "They pulled you over for swerving or some other excuse." "Something like that," Andrew admitted. The man shook his head. "Been happening for years. My nephew, good kid, works at the hospital in the city, gets stopped every time he drives through. Same officers, same excuses." He sipped his coffee. "Nothing ever changes." "Maybe it will," Andrew said quietly. After breakfast, Andrew continued his drive. The day was clear and warm, the landscape beautiful with rolling hills and small farms. He made notes about the communities he passed through, the conditions of the roads, the locations of police substations. This time, no patrol cars appeared in his mirror. By late afternoon, he'd made it to the western edge of his jurisdiction. He pulled over at a scenic overlook and called Captain Rodriguez. "How's the rest of your trip been, sir?" Rodriguez asked, sounding relieved that Andrew had reached out. "Peaceful," Andrew replied. "I've been thinking about what happened last night." Rodriguez sighed heavily. "Those two have been trouble before, sir. Nothing this bad, but there have been complaints. I should have addressed it sooner." "We'll address it now," Andrew said. "But I'm not just thinking about those 2 officers. I'm thinking about the whole system that shaped them." "Sir?" "Captain, I want all senior staff in my office Monday afternoon after I meet with Riley and Wilson. We need to talk about some changes." "What kind of changes, sir?" Rodriguez sounded cautious now. "The kind that should have happened years ago," Andrew said firmly. New training protocols, community engagement requirements, accountability measures. I have some ideas I want to share. There was a brief silence before Rodriguez responded. I'll make sure everyone's there, sir. As the sun began to set, Andrew turned his car toward home. The highway stretched out before him, carrying him back to Tanya, to his new office, to the challenge that awaited him. The encounter with Officers Riley and Wilson hadn't broken his spirit, it had focused it. Monday would be his first official day as state police chief, but the real work had already begun on a dark stretch of rural highway where two officers had unknowingly given their new boss exactly what he needed: a clear view of the problems he'd been hired to fix. Andrew smiled slightly as he drove. Those officers had no idea what was coming. Not punishment, something much more difficult: change. Monday morning arrived with a clear sky and bright sunshine, as if nature itself wanted to highlight this important day. Andrew stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his new uniform. The stars on his collar caught the light, symbols of authority that had taken him 25 years to earn. You look every inch the chief, Tanya said, appearing in the doorway with a proud smile. She stepped forward to straighten his already perfect tie. How are you feeling? Ready, Andrew replied simply. The weekend had given him time to process his experience and prepare for what came next. Their teenage daughter poked her head into the room. Dad, you look so official. Can I get a picture before you go? Andrew smiled and posed for several photos, including a family shot that Tanya insisted on. These moments of normalcy felt precious, a reminder of why his work mattered. The drive to headquarters was short but significant. Andrew noticed people looking at his official car as he passed. By tonight, his face would be on the evening news, his appointment official and public. But first, he had important business to attend to. The state police headquarters was an imposing brick building downtown. As Andrew parked in his designated spot, marked Chief, he saw Captain Rodriguez waiting at the entrance. The captain stood straight, almost at attention. Good morning, sir, Rodriguez said, extending his hand. Welcome to your first official day. Andrew shook the offered hand firmly. Thank you, Captain. Are Officers Riley and Wilson here? Yes, sir. They've been waiting in the conference room since 8:30. Andrew nodded. Good. Let's not keep them waiting any longer. As they walked through the building, officers and staff stopped to salute or nod respectfully. Andrew returned each greeting, making mental notes of faces and names. These were now his people, all of them, from the most experienced officers to the newest recruits. When they reached his office, Andrew paused to look at the nameplate on the door: Colonel Andrew Thompson, State Police Chief. Seeing his name there made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. The press conference is scheduled for 11 o'clock, Rodriguez reminded him. The governor will be here to formally introduce you. Plenty of time, Andrew said, setting his briefcase down. Now, let's speak with our two officers. The conference room was just down the hall. Through the glass panel in the door, Andrew could see Riley and Wilson sitting stiffly in their chairs. Both were in full uniform, both looked like they hadn't slept much. When Andrew entered, they jumped to their feet immediately. At ease, he said, closing the door behind him. Captain Rodriguez remained outside, giving them privacy. The room felt tense, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Andrew took his time, settling into a chair at the head of the table, then gestured for them to sit back down. Officer Riley, Officer Wilson, he began, his voice calm but firm. I thought a lot about our encounter on Friday night. Sir, Riley started, his voice slightly unsteady. I want to apologize again for. Andrew held up his hand, and Riley fell silent immediately. Before we get to apologies, I want to understand exactly what happened, Andrew said. Officer Riley, why did you really pull me over? Riley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted to Wilson, then back to Andrew. Sir, as I mentioned, we observed your vehicle crossing the center line. The truth, officer, Andrew interrupted. This isn't about punishment right now. It's about honesty. Riley looked down at his hands, then took a deep breath. Your car, it was an older model with city plates in an area where we don't see many outside visitors. And he hesitated. And Andrew prompted. And when we drove past and saw you were a black man driving alone at night, it seemed suspicious. Riley couldn't meet Andrew's eyes as he finished. Wilson nodded slightly, confirming his partner's admission. Andrew let the honest answer hang in the air for a moment. "Thank you for your honesty." "Now, Officer Wilson, what was going through your mind during that stop?" Wilson straightened up, clearly trying to maintain his professionalism despite his discomfort. "Initially, I was following my partner's lead. When you questioned the reason for the stop, I saw it as resistance, which made me more suspicious." "Did either of you consider at any point that your suspicions might be based on bias rather than actual evidence of wrongdoing?" Andrew asked. Neither officer answered immediately. Finally, Riley spoke up. "Not until afterward, sir. When we learned who you were, it made me think about all our stops, not just yours." Andrew nodded. "That's a start." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city for a moment before turning back to face them. "You both know I could fire you. It would be justified. The department has policies against racial profiling, even if they haven't always been enforced." Both officers sat very still, their futures hanging in the balance. "But firing you wouldn't solve the larger problem," Andrew continued. "It wouldn't address the culture that made you think your actions were acceptable. It wouldn't help the next black driver on that highway." He returned to his seat and leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're both being reassigned, effective immediately." Riley's shoulders slumped slightly, while Wilson nodded grimly, accepting what they saw as a demotion. "You'll be working directly with me," Andrew continued, surprising them both. "For the next 3 months, you'll be part of a new community engagement and training initiative. You'll help develop and implement new protocols for traffic stops, focusing on eliminating bias and building community trust." The officers exchanged confused glances. "Sir?" Riley asked hesitantly. "You want us to help you?" "I want you to learn, Officer Riley, and I want you to help others learn from your mistakes." Andrew's voice was firm but not unkind. "You'll also be partnered with officers from the Community Outreach Division for your regular patrols. You'll attend additional training on bias recognition and community policing." Wilson seemed to be processing this unexpected turn. Not a punishment, but a chance to improve. "Oh, make no mistake," Andrew replied. "This is both. It's a serious consequence for your actions, and it will be challenging. You'll be facing your biases directly daily. You'll be meeting with community members who have experienced profiling. It won't be comfortable." Andrew stood again, signaling that the meeting was wrapping up. "At the end of 3 months, I'll evaluate your progress. If I don't see real change, then yes, termination will be on the table." Both officers stood as well. The main conference room at headquarters was packed to capacity. News cameras lined the back wall, reporters filled the middle rows, and officers in uniform stood along the sides. In the front row, as instructed, sat officers Riley and Wilson, looking uncomfortable under the curious glances of their colleagues. Andrew waited in a small room off to the side, reviewing his notes while the governor spoke with the staff nearby. Through the door, he could hear the murmur of the crowd growing louder as the scheduled time approached. "Ready?" the governor asked, approaching him with an encouraging smile. Andrew nodded, more than ready. "I've read your proposed changes," she said quietly. "They're ambitious. You'll face resistance." "I expect to," Andrew replied. "But after what happened Friday night, I'm even more convinced they're necessary." The governor's press secretary poked his head in. 2 minutes, ma'am." As they prepared to enter, Andrew thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a young boy who'd feared the police to a young officer facing prejudice within the force, to this moment, taking command, with the power to make real change. The room fell silent as the governor stepped up to the podium. Andrew stood just behind her, tall and straight in his freshly pressed uniform. Camera flashes lit up the room. "Good morning," the governor began. "Today marks an important new chapter for our state police. After an extensive nationwide search, I am proud to introduce a leader with unparalleled experience, integrity, and vision." Andrew scanned the faces in the crowd as the governor listed his qualifications and achievements. Some looked interested, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. Change never came easily, especially to institutions steeped in tradition. And so, it is my honor to present our new state police chief, Colonel Andrew Thompson. Applause filled the room as Andrew stepped forward to the podium. He shook the governor's hand and adjusted the microphone. "Thank you, Governor, and thank you all for being here today." His deep voice carried clearly through the room. "I stand before you both honored by this appointment and humbled by the responsibility it carries." Andrew looked directly at officers Riley and Wilson in the front row. Their eyes met briefly before the officers looked down. "I believe in the vital mission of the state police," Andrew continued, "to protect and serve all citizens of this state equally, fairly, and with respect. Those aren't just words on the side of our patrol cars, they're a promise we make to every community we serve." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I also recognize that we haven't always lived up to that promise. There have been times when certain communities have experienced unequal treatment, when trust has been broken, when the badge has been tarnished by bias or misconduct." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. This kind of frankness from a police chief was unexpected. "I know this firsthand," Andrew said, his voice growing quieter but no less powerful. "Just 3 days ago, I was driving through Pine County, getting to know the areas I would soon oversee. I was pulled over without cause, treated with suspicion and disrespect, and subjected to an unnecessary search, not because of anything I had done, but because I was a black man driving alone at night." The room fell completely silent. Riley and Wilson stared straight ahead, their faces rigid. Other officers exchanged surprised glances. The reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. "The officers involved had no idea who I was," Andrew continued. "They saw only what their biases told them to see. And that experience, while personally difficult, gave me valuable insight into exactly what needs to change in our department." Andrew looked around the room, making eye contact with as many officers as possible. "Let me be clear. This is not about condemning individual officers. This is about acknowledging systemic problems and committing to fix them. This is about building a department that truly serves everyone equally." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn card, his first badge ID from 25 years ago. "When I first pinned on the badge, I made a promise to uphold the law and protect the public. Today, as your chief, I renew that promise. But I also make a new one to transform this department into a model of fair, respectful, and effective policing." Andrew set down his prepared remarks and spoke from the heart. "Starting today, we will implement comprehensive changes in how we train, how we patrol, and how we engage with all communities. We will introduce new accountability measures, civilian oversight, and transparent reporting of all stops and searches. And we will measure our success not just by crime statistics, but by public trust and confidence." He noticed some uncomfortable shifting among the veteran officers, but continued firmly. "These changes will not be easy. They will require all of us to examine our practices, our assumptions, and yes, our biases. Some may resist. Some may even leave. But those who stay and embrace this new direction will help build a department we can all be truly proud of." Andrew looked again at Riley and Wilson, "And I'm starting with the officers involved in my own incident. Not with punishment alone, but with an opportunity to be part of the solution, to help develop and implement our new training and community engagement initiatives." Surprise registered on many faces. This was not the approach most had expected. Because real change doesn't come from simply removing a few individuals, it comes from transforming the system itself. Andrew finished his prepared remarks and then added, "I'll now take a few questions." Hands shot up across the room. A reporter from the city newspaper stood. "Chief Thompson, will you be identifying the officers involved in your traffic stop?" "They're here today," Andrew replied, "and they'll be working directly with me on our reforms. But this isn't about public shaming. It's about accountability and growth." Another reporter asked, "Some officers might see these changes as an attack on police. What would you say to them?" Andrew nodded thoughtfully. "I'd say that nothing in our reforms prevents good policing. They'd only prevent biased policing. If that feels like an attack, then we have even more work to do than I thought." The questions continued for nearly 30 minutes. Throughout, Andrew remained composed and direct, neither sugarcoating the challenges nor demonizing his department. As the press conference wound down, he offered a closing thought. "The incident I experience is not unique. It happens to citizens across our state every day. The difference is, I now have the authority to change it, and I intend to use that authority starting today." When it was over, officers approached him one by one. Some offered congratulations, others asked questions about the coming changes. A few seemed skeptical but respectful. Last in line were Riley and Wilson. They stood before him, still uncomfortable but standing taller than they had in the morning meeting. "Sir," Riley said quietly, "that was not what we expected." "What did you expect, Officer Riley?" Andrew asked. "To be made examples of, to be humiliated in return." Riley looked him in the eye for the first time. "Instead, you're giving us a chance to fix things." "Not just a chance," Andrew corrected him. "A responsibility. Are you ready for it?" Both officers nodded. "Good," Andrew said. "Because we start tomorrow. I want draft protocols for unbiased traffic stops on my desk by the end of the week." As they walked away, Captain Rodriguez approached. "That was quite a first day, sir." Andrew smiled slightly. "Just the beginning, Captain, just the beginning." Later that evening, as Andrew drove home, he passed the spot where he'd been pulled over. The road looked different in daylight, less threatening, more ordinary. Just a stretch of highway where something important had begun. His phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was Tanya. "You're all over the news," she said proudly. "They're calling your speech a new direction for policing." "Let's hope it's more than just talk," Andrew replied. "With you in charge, it will be," Tanya said confidently. "How does it feel, making history your first day?" Andrew thought about the long road behind him and the even longer one ahead. "It feels," he said finally, "like the real work is just beginning."